Good morning, everybody. Let me start with introducing our panel of experts. So I'd like to start with my friend Peter Mogan. Peter is the founding partner of Mogan Daniel Slager. He's been involved in M&A activity for more than 25 years. He's on our advisory board for Nicola Wealth and also on the advisory board for our private equity fund. He is a very, very skilled lawyer in working with clients, especially on the sell side and dealing with the best outcomes, the objectives that they want to reach. Now, one of the things in the introduction, there's a more formal bio for all three speakers with their education and experience. A friend of mine, Nancy McKay, always said, if you're making an introduction for anybody, make sure you have some little known fact. Well, in Peter's case, the little known fact is that he is vice chair of an organization called Food for the Hungry. And 1 hour after we finish our presentation today, he's on the way to the airport to get a flight to Nairobi to continue the work he's done. Both he and his wife, Sue, are very philanthropic. His ulterior motive, however, for going on that flight is to keep his super elite status with Air Canada, and he's been successful in doing that. In fact, one year I remember him telling me that on New Year's Eve, he decided that he had to fly to London and back in 24 hours or he would have lost his status, and he did. Missed a great party, but he got his status, he kept it. Let me move on to David Lamb. So David, I've known David for many years, but we only got to work closely this year. We have a client of ours who went through a partial sale of her company. David and his team from Deloitte did a brilliant job in managing the process, which took many months. Dealing not just with the potential buyers, the process, whether or not you would actually go for the top bid, whether the buyer should be strategic or financial, the tax issues related to it. And it turned out to be a great outcome because subsequently this client has spoken to me and said that was a best decision that she and her husband had ever made. So I'm very impressed by the work that David does, and especially his team at Deloitte. And there is an interesting little known fact about David as well. So when David was 13, he decided to pick up the guitar, and the first song he learned was Stairway to Heaven by Led Zeppelin. Now, interestingly, I learned the same song when I was 21 and in a rock band on bass, and so I have some appreciation of how difficult that song is. So you're saying, David, you know, we have a half a band here, okay? Just need some drums and little keyboards, and if you could sing, because I know I can't, we could consider a second career. My last, but certainly not least, introduction is my friend Dave Christian. We've known each other for more than 25 years. When we first met, we both had hair, although he still had more on his face than I had on my head, but still today, as you can see from the picture here, he still has more on his face than I have on my head, although you can see now he's trimmed it really nicely. It's very smooth and stuff like that. Dave is a partner at Thorstenson. He's a brilliant tax practitioner. He's actually capable of making tax both interesting and funny. I always find that a really challenging task. I'm amazed that he can do it so well. He talks about the fact that tax should not wag the dog when it comes to doing transactions, and that's true. But once a transaction is decided on, having the right tax plan can make the difference, in some cases in millions of dollars, in getting the outcome that you want. So the tax side is relevant to the outcome. Now, Dave's little known fact is that when he was in law school, he was called Red Dave. So I'm hoping that's in reference to the color of his hair as opposed to the color of his politics. Is that reasonable? No, sorry, you were NDP. Of course you were, yes. All right, fine. That was so disappointing. All right, so a little background on where we are with respect to this group of people in the room. Here are some stats you can get, recent stats from this year on what we look like as a group. 1.2 million small and medium-sized enterprises in Canada who employ 89% of the private workforce in the country, almost 11 million people. 41% of all exports and 51% of GDP. So the question is, why plan? Well, it's interesting. First up, we have a demographic problem. About 32% of the population is over the age of 50, as opposed to 59% of business owners. And if we take, this is from the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, some interesting stats, something to look at, that 72%, in the next decade, 72% of business owners will do a transition of their business, and the total economic value of those transitions in Canada is $1.5 trillion. 25% of businesses plan on either transitioning or selling their business, 25 and 21 respectively, to their family. You can see from this slide, 51% of business owners have no succession plan whatsoever. And when we take a look at some other interesting statistics, these are the outcomes and reasons why people find an excuse not to actually have a succession plan. In other words, really the whole task becomes too daunting. There are too many problems that we don't want to have to overcome, so it's easier just not to get started. And there are lots of options. There is the acquisition, which could be financial, it could be strategic. There's a friendly buyout that which might occur, could be potentially even a competitor. There could be a sell to your employees, a management buyout, and then there's just the outright open bidding approach of selling in the open marketplace. So let's take a look at the actual case study. So we're going to use a framework to try to make it typical of what we might run into. And we're going to look at it from a variety of different points of view. Let's first look at the company. This is a trucking company, Meyer Western Transport. They operate in BC, Alberta, Washington, and Oregon. They're in the lumber industry, transportation, and transloading. The other facts that matter is they're 30 years old, 280 employees, 3 principal shareholders. They've averaged about 10% a year growth for the last 5 years, reasonable $6 million of EBITDA, and a valuation $30 to $40 million. So here are the players. This is Janet Meyer, co-founder of the company with her late husband. She's age 62, 4 kids, 2 work in the company, and obviously 2 do not. She owns 60% of the shares through a holding company. The holdco also owns the real estate that's leased back to the company. It's worth $15 million, and it generates about $500,000 a year in rental income. And her shares alone, just the shares in MWT, are worth 50% of her total net worth. When I combine the fact that the building is owned by her, that is leased to the company, so one looks at risk, you've got the risk of the fact that she has a business, and then of course the business wasn't actually open for business, we would end up with a loss of $500,000 a year in rental income as well. So she has over 80% of her net worth tied up directly or indirectly in the business. Olivier Deseres is age 47, the CEO, married, 3 children at home. Shares bought for $1.5 million with borrowed money in 2011, of which $300,000 is still owing. He's looking for growth. You know, he's young enough to want to have growth in the company, but he has competing needs for both education and ideally the family would like to try to acquire recreational property. And finally, Frank Donnelly, operations manager, bought 20% of the shares 28 years ago, just after the firm started, for $200,000. Mid-60s, wants to retire in 3 years' time, married, wants to travel more, and his shares now have grown to be worth about 75% of his net worth as well. So that's Meyer Transport. So if we take a look at what's called a SWOT analysis, and I'm sure most of you have been involved in this over the years, this is how Meyer Transportation looks from that perspective. So in the strengths, great reputation, a modern fleet, proprietary technology, good leadership, solid growth, and high barriers to entry. In terms of opportunities, 70% of their customers are in Canada, so they can expand in the US. They could sell their proprietary loading system as a software solution. They have better productivity, would make a difference in terms of their results, and they can expand either eastwards, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, or southwards to California. Against which the weaknesses include the fact the industry is competitive, it's cyclical, they do not have an ERP, they've had some safety record issues that are problematic, lack of long-term contracts for security of cash flow, and customer concentration. Roughly their top 5 or 6 clients are 75 or 80% of their revenue. The threats are new transportation systems, softwood lumber, political and environmental issues. Attracting millennial workers is an issue.